In 2015, on a cold Friday evening in the suburban outskirts of Portland, Oregon, a 911 operator received an urgent call at precisely 9:47 p.m. The caller, later identified as 39-year-old Melissa Brooks, sounded distressed and shaky. Her words came out in gasps as she described finding an unresponsive man near her cafe, which was closed for the night. She emphasized that he wasn't breathing, urging the dispatcher to send emergency responders immediately. The location was a quiet stretch of Main Street, lined with small businesses and dimly lit streetlights. Melissa's Cafe, a popular spot for its organic offerings, was situated at the corner of the block. The area was largely deserted at that hour, save for the occasional hum of passing cars. The cafe's exterior lights were still on, casting a faint glow on the sidewalk where the man's body lay sprawled. The 911 call triggered an immediate response. Within 10 minutes, a patrol car and an ambulance arrived at the scene. Paramedics quickly confirmed that the man was deceased. His body was positioned awkwardly on the ground, partially leaning against a concrete curb, with visible signs of trauma to the head. A small pool of blood had formed beneath him, staining the cracked pavement. Officers from the Portland Police Department began securing the area. Yellow crime scene tape was strung up to cordon off the site, and nearby businesses with security cameras were flagged for potential evidence. Melissa was found standing a few feet away from the body, visibly shaken. Her clothing bore smudges of blood, and her hands trembled as she tried to explain what had happened. The officers noted her state, pale, disoriented, and unable to provide a coherent account of the events leading up to her discovery of the body. The deceased was later identified as Jason Brooks, a 42-year-old local real estate agent and Melissa's ex-husband. His wallet and phone were found in his pockets, ruling out robbery as a motive. The weapon, if there had been one, was not immediately evident. Detectives speculated that the head injury could have been caused by a fall or a physical altercation. Blood splatter patterns on the curb and sidewalk were photographed for analysis. Melissa was transported to the local precinct for questioning. Although not formally arrested, she was considered a person of interest due to her proximity to the victim and the presence of blood on her clothing. At the precinct, detectives conducted an initial interview. Melissa claimed she had been locking up her cafe for the night when she noticed Jason outside. She approached to check on him, only to find him unresponsive. Her account was vague and inconsistent, with several details missing or contradictory. She attributed this to shock and insisted she had no knowledge of how Jason ended up in his fatal condition. The investigation intensified as forensic teams arrived on the scene. They meticulously examined the area for physical evidence, including any signs of a struggle. Witnesses from nearby businesses were questioned, but none reported seeing or hearing anything unusual that evening. Surveillance footage from a bakery across the street revealed a shadowy figure lingering near the cafe moments before Melissa called 911. Detectives suspected this could be Jason, but the footage was too grainy to confirm. By midnight, the scene was cleared, and Jason's body was transported to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. Preliminary observations suggested blunt force trauma to the head as the cause of death, but further tests were needed to determine the manner, accidental or intentional. Meanwhile, detectives began piecing together the timeline of Jason's last movements, as well as his recent interactions with Melissa, to understand what had led to his untimely death. Melissa Brooks, a 38-year-old cafe owner, lived in a quiet suburb of Portland, Oregon. Her cafe, Brooks Organic Bakery, was a small but beloved local establishment known for its farm-to-table philosophy and signature organic desserts. Customers raved about her homemade pies, cookies, and pastries, which often featured seasonal fruits sourced from local farmers. However, behind the polished image of a successful entrepreneur, Melissa's personal life was marked by long-standing struggles and insecurities. Since childhood, Melissa had battled significant weight issues. Her parents owned a small diner where rich, calorie-dense comfort foods were staples of the menu, shaping her relationship with food early on. As a teenager, her weight made her a target for ridicule, fostering a deep sense of self-consciousness that followed her into adulthood. Despite her talents as a baker and her warm demeanor, Melissa often withdrew socially, feeling judged for her appearance. Melissa's marriage to Jason Brooks, a 42-year-old real estate agent, seemed ideal on the surface. Jason was charismatic and well-groomed, known in their community for his sharp suits and polished sales pitches. His ability to close high-value property deals had earned him a reputation as one of the city's top agents. However, his charm masked a colder, more critical side that Melissa endured in private. Jason frequently berated her for her weight, often using backhanded compliments or outright insults that chipped away at her confidence. These remarks, paired with his dismissive attitude, created a growing emotional distance between them. The tension in their marriage escalated when Jason's behavior became increasingly erratic. He often worked late hours and grew secretive about his whereabouts. Melissa's suspicions were confirmed one afternoon when she visited a trendy downtown coffee shop and saw Jason sitting with a much younger woman. The woman, a barista named Claire, was everything Melissa felt she wasn't: slim, stylish, and effortlessly confident. Although Melissa didn't confront them immediately, the sight of their flirtatious interaction lingered in her mind. Her worst fears were realized weeks later when she discovered text messages on Jason's phone that left no doubt about his infidelity. The messages revealed an ongoing affair with Claire, complete with plans for romantic weekends and scathing comments about Melissa. The betrayal hit Melissa hard, but it also sparked a resolve she hadn't felt in years. She confronted Jason, who initially denied everything but eventually admitted to the affair. The confrontation was heated, with Jason blaming Melissa for their marital issues and insisting she was responsible for his unhappiness. Feeling humiliated and broken, Melissa filed for divorce. The divorce proceedings were contentious. Jason fought to keep their shared assets, including the house they had lived in for nearly a decade. Melissa, who had poured her savings and energy into building her cafe, refused to let it become part of the settlement. Ultimately, she managed to retain ownership of the cafe, though it came at the cost of losing the home they had shared. Jason moved into a modern downtown condo, leaving Melissa to rebuild her life alone. In the months following the divorce, Melissa threw herself into her work. The cafe became her refuge, a place where she could channel her emotions into something tangible. However, the stress of the separation took its toll. She found herself overeating, gaining more weight, and retreating further from the few friends she had. The once vibrant and hopeful woman was now deeply isolated, her life revolving around the confines of her cafe and her modest apartment. Behind the scenes, Jason's life seemed to flourish. His relationship with Claire became public, drawing whispers in the community. Melissa overheard customers gossiping about the couple, fueling her feelings of inadequacy and resentment. Jason's success in real estate continued, with his face regularly appearing on billboards and advertisements throughout Portland. Meanwhile, Melissa remained invisible, burdened by the weight of her personal failures. What neither of them knew was that their paths, now seemingly so far apart, would soon converge in ways neither could have anticipated. Melissa's world, once defined by quiet suffering and routine, was about to shift dramatically, setting into motion events that would lead to the fateful night when Jason's lifeless body was found outside her cafe. The divorce had been a deeply painful experience for Melissa Brooks, but it also marked a turning point. For the first time in years, she began to see her life not as a series of obligations and disappointments, but as an opportunity to reclaim control. Stripped of her marriage and the home she had shared with Jason, Melissa decided to focus on the one thing she could still control: herself. Her first step was joining a well-known CrossFit gym located just a few miles from her cafe. The gym, frequented by fitness enthusiasts and beginners alike, was known for its intense training sessions and sense of community. Melissa was an outlier among the lean and muscular crowd when she first walked in, but she approached the challenge with quiet determination. Her workouts were grueling at first, leaving her sore and exhausted, but she returned week after week, gradually improving her endurance and strength. Melissa also enlisted the help of a professional dietitian, who guided her through a comprehensive nutrition plan. For the first time in her life, she began to understand the science of food and how it impacted her body. She replaced her beloved comfort foods with lean proteins, whole grains, and fresh vegetables. The changes were difficult to sustain, especially as she continued running her cafe, but Melissa committed herself fully. She tracked every meal, attended weekly weigh-ins, and learned to resist the temptations of the baked goods she once indulged in regularly. Her efforts paid off. Over the course of a year, Melissa lost 100 pounds. The transformation was not just physical but emotional as well. For the first time in decades, she felt a sense of pride when she looked in the mirror. The confidence she had long buried beneath layers of insecurity began to resurface. She started wearing fitted clothing, styling her hair differently, and even allowing herself small indulgences like wearing makeup again. As Melissa changed, so did her cafe. Inspired by her newfound appreciation for health and wellness, she decided to overhaul the menu. The sugary desserts that once defined Brooks Organic Bakery were replaced with healthier options: smoothies, vegan muffins, gluten-free pastries, and bowls packed with superfoods. She partnered with local farmers to source fresh, organic ingredients and added a juice bar that became a hit with young professionals and fitness enthusiasts in the area. Word of the cafe's transformation spread quickly, drawing a new, trendy crowd. Melissa began hosting yoga classes on the cafe's patio on weekend mornings, further solidifying its reputation as a hub for health-conscious locals. Financially, the cafe experienced a surge in profits. Where once it had been a modest operation catering to a small but loyal clientele, it was now a vibrant business that attracted influencers and food bloggers who raved about its offerings on social media. Melissa used the additional revenue to renovate the space, adding sleek wooden tables, bright greenery, and modern light fixtures. The cafe, much like Melissa herself, had undergone a complete transformation. Despite her successes, Melissa kept a low profile. She avoided social gatherings and steered clear of local gossip, preferring to focus on her routines and the cafe's growing demands. She knew people whispered about her dramatic weight loss and the changes in her lifestyle, but she chose to remain private, letting her actions speak for themselves. She rarely thought of Jason, except in fleeting moments of bitterness when she reflected on his betrayal and the years she had wasted in an unhappy marriage. Melissa's new life seemed idyllic on the surface, but it was not without its challenges. The pressure to maintain her business and her health often left her exhausted. She occasionally felt overwhelmed by the attention her transformation attracted, particularly from men who now seemed to notice her in ways they hadn't before. Though she had no interest in dating, Melissa couldn't ignore the feeling that her life was slowly opening up to possibilities she had never imagined. Her transformation had turned her into a new version of herself, one that exuded strength, resilience, and independence. Yet beneath this exterior, the scars of her past remained. Unbeknownst to her, the shadows of her old life were creeping closer, threatening to disrupt the fragile stability she had worked so hard to build. Melissa Brooks had little time for leisure as she juggled her thriving cafe and her new fitness regimen. Yet, one unremarkable weekday afternoon, she found herself pulling into an eco-friendly car wash on the outskirts of Portland. Her SUV, splattered with dust from the rural roads she often traveled to meet local suppliers, needed attention. The car wash, nestled between a hardware store and a bike repair shop, boasted a sign that read Harris Eco Wash, veteran-owned, organic products only. Intrigued by its environmental ethos, Melissa decided to give it a try. The facility was modest but meticulously maintained. Rows of biodegradable soaps, waxes, and detergents lined the shelves in the waiting area. The scent of citrus and eucalyptus hung in the air, replacing the harsh chemical odors typical of such establishments. A handful of employees worked efficiently under the guidance of a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 40s. His movements were purposeful, and his commanding presence suggested a history of discipline and leadership. The man was Nate Harris, the owner of the car wash. A former Marine with multiple deployments under his belt, Nate had started the business 2 years earlier with funds from a veteran support program. The program aimed to help ex-service members transition back to civilian life by providing grants for small businesses. Nate's decision to focus on environmentally friendly practices reflected his strong personal values and commitment to sustainability. His business quickly gained a loyal following among environmentally conscious locals. When Nate approached Melissa to discuss the services they offered, she was struck by his demeanor. He was polite but straightforward, with a quiet confidence that put her at ease. Nate recognized Melissa almost immediately. Her cafe had become a well-known fixture in the community, and her remarkable physical transformation had not gone unnoticed. He complimented her success in a way that felt genuine, without the flattery or pretense she had grown wary of since her divorce. As Melissa waited for her car to be cleaned, she learned more about Nate through casual conversation. He had grown up in a small town in Oregon, joined the Marines at 18, and spent nearly 2 decades serving his country. His transition back to civilian life had been challenging. The loss of the structured environment he was accustomed to left him feeling adrift until he discovered a passion for sustainable living and community-oriented business. This passion became the foundation for Harris Eco Wash. Melissa found herself drawn to Nate's story. His resilience and dedication mirrored her own journey of reinvention. They bonded over their shared commitment to healthier, more purposeful lifestyles and their efforts to build something meaningful from scratch. Nate, in turn, admired Melissa's determination and the innovative approach she had brought to her cafe. In the weeks that followed, Melissa and Nate began to see each other more often. At first, their interactions were casual, quick chats when Melissa stopped by for a car wash or when Nate visited her cafe to try one of her signature smoothies. Gradually, these encounters turned into longer conversations over coffee or walks through the nearby nature trails. Their shared values and mutual respect deepened their connection. Nate's influence on Melissa extended beyond companionship. His disciplined mindset and optimistic outlook inspired her to push herself further, both personally and professionally. Melissa, who had once been hesitant to trust others after years of emotional turmoil, found herself opening up to Nate in ways she hadn't thought possible. His warmth and steadfast support became a source of comfort and stability in her life. As their relationship blossomed, Melissa's cafe and Nate's car wash began to cross-promote each other. Melissa added flyers for Harris Eco Wash to her cafe, and Nate offered discount coupons for her cafe at his car wash. Their collaboration strengthened their bond while also benefiting their businesses. For the first time in years, Melissa felt a sense of balance and fulfillment. Yet, beneath the surface of her newfound happiness, the shadow of her past still loomed, waiting to resurface in ways neither of them could foresee. Jason Brooks had built his reputation as one of Portland's top real estate agents through years of networking, relentless self-promotion, and an uncanny ability to close deals. However, the real estate market of 2015 was unforgiving. A sudden downturn in housing demand, coupled with rising interest rates, created a challenging environment for realtors like Jason, whose portfolio relied heavily on high-end properties. His income, once steady and lucrative, began to dwindle. Clients backed out of deals, properties lingered unsold, and Jason's financial reserves started to evaporate. Jason's problems were compounded by poor financial management. His extravagant lifestyle, which included leasing a luxury downtown condo and frequenting expensive restaurants with his younger girlfriend Claire, had left him with mounting debts. The high commissions he once earned were no longer enough to sustain his lifestyle or cover the costs of his office space and marketing campaigns. As months passed, Jason began missing payments on his car lease and credit cards. His once polished image started to crack, and whispers about his declining fortune spread through the local real estate community. The tipping point came when Jason was forced to downsize his business. He let go of his assistant, a move that left him overwhelmed with administrative work he had long avoided. His efforts to retain high-value clients became increasingly desperate. He cut his commission rates to underbid competitors, but this only hurt his credibility and profitability. His attempts to rebuild his client base through networking events and social media campaigns yielded minimal results, as other agents quickly filled the void he left in the market. One fateful afternoon, Jason picked up a copy of the Portland Observer, a popular local publication. Flipping through its pages, he stumbled upon an article highlighting small businesses that were revitalizing the city's suburbs. Prominently featured was Melissa Brooks and her cafe, now celebrated as a shining example of entrepreneurial success. The article praised Melissa's transformation, both personally and professionally, showcasing before and after photos of her weight loss and detailing the cafe's innovative approach to healthy dining. The glowing coverage included testimonials from satisfied customers and a mention of the partnerships Melissa had forged with local vendors. The article hit Jason like a punch to the gut. Seeing Melissa thriving while his own life crumbled filled him with a toxic mix of anger, envy, and regret. He had once dismissed her as unremarkable, someone whose worth he measured only by her weight and insecurities. Now, she was being lauded as a community role model, her success a stark contrast to his spiraling downfall. Jason began obsessing over her accomplishments, revisiting the article repeatedly and scrutinizing every detail of her life that was now on public display. His fixation on Melissa deepened as his situation worsened. Claire, frustrated by Jason's dwindling finances and erratic behavior, ended their relationship, leaving him alone in his increasingly empty condo. His attempts to salvage his business failed, and he was forced to sell his car to cover overdue bills. Stripped of his status symbols and support network, Jason's resentment toward Melissa grew unchecked. Jason began tracking Melissa's movements, initially out of curiosity but soon with an unsettling intensity. He discovered her cafe's social media pages and monitored the events and specials she hosted. He parked outside the cafe on several occasions, watching as customers streamed in and out, their cheerful faces a painful reminder of his own failure. His jealousy fueled delusions that Melissa's success had come at his expense, convincing himself that she owed her accomplishments to lessons she had learned from him during their marriage. As Jason's mental state deteriorated, his actions became more erratic. He began leaving anonymous negative reviews about Melissa's cafe online, hoping to tarnish her reputation. He called mutual acquaintances under the guise of casual conversation to dig for details about her personal life, particularly any relationships she might have. These efforts, however, only deepened his sense of impotence as Melissa's life continued to thrive unimpeded by his interference. By the end of the summer, Jason's finances were in shambles, and his career was effectively over. He avoided calls from creditors and started drinking heavily, often spending nights alone in his condo, consumed by thoughts of revenge. The once charming and confident realtor had been reduced to a shadow of himself, driven by a festering obsession with a woman he no longer recognized but couldn't let go of. Jason's growing desperation and resentment set the stage for the tragic confrontation that would soon follow, a collision of his crumbling world with the life Melissa had rebuilt from the ashes of their shared past. It was late on a Friday evening in October, and Melissa Brooks was alone at her cafe, tidying up after a busy day. The cafe was quiet, its interior dimly lit except for the warm glow of the Edison bulbs above the counter. She had stayed late to finalize preparations for a weekend event. The streets outside were empty, and a soft drizzle began to fall, misting the windows. Unbeknownst to her, Jason Brooks was parked a short distance away, watching. Jason had been drinking heavily that night. Bottles of whiskey and vodka littered his condo, evidence of his growing dependency. Hours earlier, in a drunken haze, he had made the decision to confront Melissa. He had spent weeks stewing over perceived slights and imagined grievances, his resentment boiling into rage. Fueled by alcohol and desperation, he armed himself with a handgun he had purchased years ago and drove to her cafe. Melissa locked the front door and stepped outside, holding a small stack of receipts and a tote bag over her shoulder. The cool night air greeted her, along with the faint sound of rain tapping against the pavement. She turned to secure the lock, her back to the street, unaware that Jason was approaching. His footsteps, uneven and heavy, grew louder as he crossed the sidewalk toward her. When Melissa turned around, she was startled to find him standing only a few feet away. Jason's appearance was alarming. His clothes were disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, and his movements erratic. The handgun he held was loosely aimed in her direction, shaking slightly in his unsteady grip. Melissa froze, her mind racing. Jason began yelling, his voice slurred but filled with venom. He accused her of ruining his life, blaming her for his failed career, his financial ruin, and his shattered reputation. His words were a chaotic mix of self-pity and threats, each one laced with the bitterness that had consumed him. Melissa attempted to de-escalate the situation, but Jason's agitation only grew. He stepped closer, the gun now pointed directly at her. Fear coursed through Melissa as she realized how volatile the situation had become. Jason's posture was unsteady, his balance faltering as he waved the weapon in a wide arc. The tension reached a breaking point when he lurched forward, grabbing her arm roughly. In the struggle that followed, Melissa's survival instincts took over. She fought to free herself from Jason's grip, her movements frantic and defensive. The gun fell from his hand, clattering to the ground. In his intoxicated state, Jason stumbled and lost his footing, forcing Melissa to push him away with all her strength. He staggered backward, tripping over the curb. His head struck the edge of the concrete with a sickening thud, and his body collapsed onto the wet pavement. For a moment, the street was silent except for the rain. Melissa stood frozen, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps as she stared at Jason's motionless form. She stepped closer, her hands trembling, and crouched to check for signs of life. His chest wasn't moving, and his skin was pale under the dim light of the street lamp. A small pool of blood began to form near his head, mixing with the rainwater on the ground. Panic set in. Melissa's mind raced with thoughts of what had just happened and the consequences she might face. She couldn't comprehend how the confrontation had escalated so quickly or how it had ended so tragically. Driven by fear, she fled the scene, leaving Jason's lifeless body behind. She rushed home, her clothes damp and her hands stained with blood, replaying the night's events in her mind. The next morning, the police received a report of a body found outside the cafe. Detectives arrived to investigate and quickly identified the deceased as Jason Brooks. Evidence at the scene suggested a struggle, but no weapon was recovered. Witnesses later told police that they had seen Nate Harris, Melissa's boyfriend, near the cafe that evening. Nate was taken in for questioning, and his military background and physical presence made him an immediate suspect. Melissa, watching the news coverage of Nate's arrest, felt a wave of guilt and dread. She knew she couldn't allow an innocent man to take the blame for her actions, no matter how terrified she was of the consequences. Her decision to come forward and tell the truth would alter the course of her life forever. Melissa Brooks sat in her car outside the Portland Police Department, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she tried to steady her breathing. For nearly 48 hours, she had wrestled with the weight of her decision. Nate Harris had been wrongfully arrested for Jason's death, and the thought of an innocent man suffering for her actions had become unbearable. Dressed in plain, dark clothing, Melissa finally stepped out of the vehicle and entered the station. Inside, she approached the front desk and calmly requested to speak with a detective. Her voice trembled as she identified herself and stated that she had information about Jason Brooks' death. Within minutes, Melissa was escorted into an interview room where two detectives joined her. She was visibly shaken but resolute as she recounted the events of that fateful night in painstaking detail. Melissa explained how Jason had cornered her outside the cafe, brandished a weapon, and threatened her. She described their struggle, the panic that had overtaken her, and how she had pushed him in self-defense, leading to his fatal fall. Her voice cracked as she admitted to fleeing the scene in fear. Throughout the interview, Melissa was cooperative, answering every question the detectives asked and providing details they hadn't yet uncovered. Her confession was recorded, and her statement corroborated much of the evidence already gathered at the scene. Following the interview, Melissa was placed under arrest. The charges were initially severe, as investigators worked to determine whether her actions constituted manslaughter or self-defense. She was processed and held in custody pending further investigation. News of her arrest quickly spread through the community, adding fuel to the media coverage that had already surrounded Jason's death. Many speculated about Melissa's motives, while others, particularly her loyal cafe patrons, rallied behind her, insisting she had acted out of necessity. Melissa's case drew the attention of a prominent local defense attorney, who agreed to represent her. He built a compelling argument that her actions had been purely defensive, emphasizing Jason's history of emotional abuse, his intoxicated state, and the weapon he had brought to the confrontation. Key evidence, including the surveillance footage from a nearby business showing Jason's erratic approach to the cafe that night, further supported her claims. The medical examiner's report confirmed that Jason's injuries were consistent with an accidental fall during a physical altercation, bolstering Melissa's defense. The trial was brief but emotionally charged. Witnesses, including former friends and clients of Jason's, testified about his recent erratic behavior and decline, painting a picture of a man unraveling under the weight of his failures. Melissa's attorney highlighted her transformation over the past year, framing her actions as those of a woman who had been forced into a life-threatening situation and acted to protect herself. The prosecution attempted to cast doubt on her motives, suggesting that her history with Jason and his betrayal during their marriage might have fueled an intentional act of revenge. However, the evidence in Melissa's transparent testimony ultimately swayed the jury. The verdict was delivered after just 2 days of deliberation. Melissa was found not guilty of manslaughter, but the court deemed her actions reckless in fleeing the scene. She was sentenced to community service and required to attend a mandatory program for psychological rehabilitation. The sentence, though lenient compared to the charges she had faced, marked a turning point in her life. Melissa accepted the consequences with a sense of relief, knowing that the truth had come to light and Nate had been exonerated. In the weeks following the trial, Melissa returned to her cafe, determined to rebuild her life once more. The cafe had remained open during her absence, thanks to her dedicated staff and the support of the community. Customers greeted her return with warmth and encouragement, turning the cafe into a symbol of resilience and second chances. Melissa used her platform to share her story with other women, speaking openly about her struggles, her transformation, and the night that had changed everything. Her journey inspired others to confront their own challenges and seek empowerment, no matter how daunting the path. Nate Harris, who had stood by her throughout the ordeal, became an unwavering source of support. Their bond, tested by the turmoil of recent events, only grew stronger. Together, they envisioned a future filled with purpose and hope, one where they could continue building their businesses and supporting their community. For Melissa, the cafe was no longer just a workplace, it was a sanctuary, a testament to her strength, and a reminder of how far she had come. Despite the scars left by her past, she found solace in the knowledge that she had reclaimed her life and emerged stronger than ever.